Welcome to a journey beyond the boundaries of science and spirituality. What you are about to read is not just a story, but an ancient map leading to the wonders that lie dormant within your very body. A memory encoded in DNA, a message from prehistoric times conveyed through symbols, sounds, and light, waiting for you to awaken. Part 1. The Silent Code. In the quiet chambers of ancient temples, where only the initiated were allowed to enter, a truth whispered its way through the ages. A truth not written in ink, but in light, vibration, and sacred resonance. They said it was hidden in your blood, in the spiraling helix of your DNA. Not merely a blueprint for your body, but a sacred script encoded with divine potential. You were not born empty, you were born encrypted. And Thoth, the ancient scribe of the gods, knew the key. Modern science peers into microscopes, amazed by the elegance of cellular structures, yet only scratching the surface. They isolate genes, sequence genomes, but miss the pulse, the subtle rhythm hidden beneath. Thoth understood what today's scientists are only beginning to suspect, that vibration is not just a feature of reality, but its architect. According to the Emerald Tablets, everything vibrates, and those vibrations do not just describe reality, they create it. And so it was written, to awaken what is dormant within you, you must not simply observe, you must resonate. There is a pattern, a frequency, a forgotten harmony that once aligned all life. And your body, divine technology cloaked in flesh, was built to respond to it. Disease, emotional blockages, creative paralysis, even the barriers of aging are not permanent states. They are merely indications that you have become out of tune. Just as a musical instrument must be tuned to perform, so too must you. Thoth called it the language of the gods, and encoded its secrets in resonance, specifically in sacred frequencies like 528 Hz and 963 Hz. These were not chosen randomly. When chanted or listened to in silence, these frequencies could awaken dormant layers within the genetic matrix. The ancients built echo chambers, temples carved from stone, not for worship, but for transformation. Their rituals were vibrational technologies, sonic alchemy, to realign the self with the divine code. The sacred frequencies work not only on your cells, but on your consciousness. You begin to dream more vividly. You remember things you never learned in this life. Symbols return. Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail, spirals of light, fractals repeating. These are not illusions. They are access points, interfaces between your limited perception and your vast encoded memory. The more you harmonize, the more you recall what was always within you. The process, as recorded by the scribes of Hermetic tradition, unfolds in 3 stages. First, vibrational tuning. You create a field of resonance within and around you by listening to or chanting the sacred tones. Second, the geometry of manifestation. You visualize symbols, ancient keys designed to shape the ether and interact with your DNA. And third, quantum verification. You track your transformation, measurable changes in energy, clarity, vitality, and even cellular regeneration. These steps are not metaphors, they are instructions, precise and powerful. And so the journey begins. Not in a lab, not in a classroom, but in the silence between heartbeats, in the stillness where intention meets vibration. For in that space, creation listens. In that moment, the divine within you begins to stir. You are not broken, you are simply waiting to resonate. Part 2. The Forgotten Rituals. William had never believed in coincidence. Every turn in his life felt like it had been orchestrated by something beyond logic, something watching, waiting. He had studied neuroscience, devoured textbooks on genetics, explored meditation and Eastern traditions, yet none of it prepared him for what he discovered in a dusty marketplace in Cairo. There, beneath a crumbling pile of ancient scrolls and sun-bleached pages, he found a manuscript bound in serpent leather, its cover etched with an unfamiliar symbol. A spiral wrapped around an eye made of light. The seller claimed nothing, only smiled and said, "You didn't find it, it remembered you." He brought it home with trembling hands, and for nights he read feverishly under the dim light of a single candle. The words weren't instructions, they were experiences, testimonies from mystics who had walked the path of vibrational awakening. The deeper he read, the more he felt the stirrings inside his own body. His dreams became more vivid. He began waking up with fragments of songs in his head, tones he'd never heard before, but instinctively knew were ancient. The manuscript spoke of the Temple of Echoes, a structure once built not with tools but with tones. Thoth, it said, had designed chambers to resonate at precisely 528 Hz, the frequency of love, regeneration, and cellular alignment. These chambers weren't symbolic, they were acoustic technologies. When a practitioner stepped inside and chanted the corresponding note, the chamber itself became a conductor, amplifying the intention and tuning the cells like strings of a harp. The resonance would ripple through the blood, the bones, the very DNA. William was skeptical, but the text was precise. It even offered a modern substitute. If no temple existed, one could create a resonance field using high-quality headphones in a quiet space. He followed the guidance: sit comfortably, eyes closed, spine straight. Play a pure 528 Hz tone, and as the sound entered his ears, visualize it forming spirals of light around his body. On the 7th day of this practice, something changed. He didn't just hear the tone, he felt it. Not on his skin, but in his cells. They vibrated, buzzed, as though they were responding to a long-lost language. Then came the geometry. The manuscript instructed him to visualize Ouroboros, the eternal serpent, coiling around his DNA. As the 528 Hz tone played, he imagined the serpent tightening, aligning, illuminating each helix. The visualization wasn't static, it moved, it breathed. He felt the DNA respond, pulsating with golden light. With each session, his body felt lighter, his thoughts clearer. What once overwhelmed him became manageable. Emotional wounds began surfacing, not to harm him, but to be healed. This was what the manuscript called vibrational transmutation. As long-buried traumas emerged, he didn't fight them. He allowed the tone to pass through them. He imagined the sound dissolving fear like salt in water. The vibration didn't suppress the shadows, it illuminated them, and they began to fade. One passage stood out above the rest. It read, "Your body is the harp, your intention the player, and vibration the song. If you do not tune the harp, the gods will never hear you." He understood. The gods were not external beings, but aspects of himself, sleeping fragments of divine intelligence embedded within his own structure. Every frequency aligned was a knock on their door, and they were starting to awaken. He began keeping a journal. Every night he noted the changes: more restful sleep, clarity in decision-making, bursts of creative insight. He no longer needed caffeine, his body generated energy from within. His friends noticed his glow, his calm. Some were intrigued, others were unsettled. William didn't try to explain. Some doors open only from the inside, but he knew the process wasn't complete. The manuscript hinted at a final stage: quantum verification. Not a mystical concept, but a measurable shift. The ancients had no smartwatches, no brain scans, but they had intuition sharpened by resonance. William decided to monitor his changes: REM cycles, heart rate variability, physical endurance, emotional volatility. The results surprised even him. He wasn't just feeling better, he was becoming someone else. Not someone new, someone ancient, someone remembered. Part 3, the memory of light. It was on the 21st night that William's world began to bend. Not collapse, not shatter, but bend as if space itself had grown soft, more receptive. The sounds, once just frequencies, began to dance with form. He would sit with his headphones on, 528 Hz gently humming, and shadows on the wall would shift. Patterns would ripple across his skin like wind across water. He wasn't hallucinating, he was witnessing. On that night, the light returned. He had just finished his session, sitting still, eyes closed, breath aligned with the pulsing tone. In the darkness behind his eyelids, a spiral emerged. Soft at first, then radiant, like golden smoke. But it wasn't smoke, it was memory. Not from this life, but from a time before language, before names. He saw himself in white robes, standing inside a chamber of black stone etched with glowing symbols. Around him, others chanted. The air shimmered with tone and fire. In that moment, he remembered. He had done this before, not just once, many times, across lifetimes. The manuscript had mentioned the return of encoded memory, that when the correct frequency, visualization, and intention were combined, a gateway would open, not outward, but inward. The DNA, like a coiled serpent, did not just hold instructions for proteins and physical growth. It held memory, it held identity, not just biological, but spiritual. Lineage of soul. And the spiral of light was the record. After that experience, William's relationship with sound changed. He no longer listened to the frequencies, he merged with them. He could feel when a note was slightly out of sync. He adjusted not the volume, but his own breath, his own heartbeat, until he and the tone became indistinguishable. Meditation turned into communion. Visualization turned into vision. He began experimenting with other frequencies mentioned in the manuscript. 963 Hz was called the frequency of divine awakening. It was said to activate the pineal gland, the seat of inner sight. On the third day of chanting this tone, William saw symbols not with his eyes, but inside his mind, a language not spoken aloud, but understood through vibration. These symbols pulsed with meaning. He traced them in the air, not knowing how, but knowing it was right. He understood now why Thoth had called this the language of the gods. It wasn't about words, it was about frequency matching. The universe, like a giant chamber, responded only to resonance. When your internal vibration aligned with the cosmic symphony, reality began to echo back. It spoke in signs, synchronicities, and sudden insights. It spoke in numbers repeating 1111, 333, 144, in feathers, in dreams, in the rhythm of birdsong. But with expansion came resistance. Old memories began rising, traumas, regrets, failures, moments buried deep in his flesh. They returned not to haunt, but to be rewritten. At first, William feared he was regressing, that all the clarity was a temporary high, but the manuscript had warned of this. Vibrational resistance. As higher frequencies penetrate the body, denser energies surface to be cleared. It is not breakdown, it is detox. The pain was purification. He leaned into it. During his 528 Hz sessions, when fear arose, he did not run. He breathed with the tone. He imagined it flooding the dark corners of his memory, not to erase them, but to illuminate them. He saw the child version of himself crying. Instead of pushing the image away, he held it. Let the vibration pass through both of them. The child smiled, the image faded, and something released. He felt lighter. Each session became not just a practice, but a ritual of remembering, of peeling away layers of amnesia laid upon the soul by time and trauma. With every tone, a veil lifted. He was not becoming someone new. He was remembering someone ancient, a version of himself who once walked in echoing temples and sang the stones to life. Reality outside began to shift too. People began asking William for advice without knowing why. Strangers opened up to him. Children stared at him as if they saw something he had forgotten. Electronic devices reacted oddly in his presence. Lights flickered when he was deep in meditation. His phone rang without calls. He wasn't afraid, he was aware. Awareness became his companion. He saw beyond reactions, beyond words. He began to feel people's fields, their mood, their story, their resistance. And slowly he stopped judging. Everyone was remembering in their own way, in their own rhythm. The frequency had taught him patience. And then one morning a voice, not external but unmistakably real, whispered within, "You are not activating your DNA. You are activating your memory of being divine." He wept, not out of sadness, but because for the first time he felt whole. Part 4. The Geometry of Awakening. The morning after the voice spoke within him, William awoke before dawn. The sky was a deep violet, the stars still hanging like echoes of something ancient. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't need music. The frequency was already inside him. It hummed gently in his bones, in his breath, as if his body had become a tuning fork for cosmic memory. He remembered a passage from the manuscript that had once confused him. It read, "The stars form the body of the divine. Sacred geometry is not art, it is memory." Until now, it had seemed poetic. But as William sat on the floor, cross-legged, eyes closed, a vision came, not imagined but revealed. Shapes of impossible precision unfolded within his mind's eye. Spirals nested within spirals, triangles birthing circles. The flower of life, radiant and alive, spinning slowly in infinite symmetry. He could feel it forming not just in thought, but in the air around him. As if the geometry was not just an image, but a presence. He understood now. Vibration was the voice, and geometry was the grammar. One spoke, the other structured. To align with the divine didn't mean to obey a god in the sky. It meant to resonate with the geometry of life itself. Thoth had called this the geometry of manifestation. In the ancient temples, initiates would meditate for hours on these sacred forms, not as decoration, but as codes. These shapes weren't invented by humans. They were inherited from creation itself. When the correct geometry was visualized alongside sacred frequency, it acted like a key, a passcode that unlocked deeper functions of consciousness. William was now holding one of those keys. During his next session, he layered the practice. 5 and 28 hertz played in the background as he visualized the Ouroboros circling the double helix of his DNA. The serpent moved rhythmically, not aggressively but with reverence, as if it too was remembering. At the point where the tail met the mouth, the DNA ignited in his vision. Light exploded outward in fractal waves. He gasped. The vision vanished, but something remained. A hum, a warmth, a new stillness. It was not just interchange, his outer life began to realign. The job that once drained him now felt like a misfit suit, tight, itchy, and foreign. Conversations that used to thrill him now felt hollow. He wasn't judging others, he was simply vibrating out of old patterns, not above them, beyond them. He began seeking solitude, not out of loneliness, but out of alignment. Nature became his cathedral. Trees whispered in tones, water shimmered with language. Every cloud seemed to carry a message, not in words, but in design. Geometry was everywhere. He now saw it in the petals of flowers, in the spiraling shells of snails, in the hexagonal eyes of bees. Life was not chaotic. It was encoded, and now he could read the code. The manuscript mentioned one final form of activation, sacred breath. It explained that breath, when synchronized with vibration and geometry, was the ignition spark. The ancients called it the wind within the wind. Not mere oxygen, but intentioned breath, deliberate, conscious, slow. As William inhaled with the sound of the frequency, he imagined drawing golden light into his cells. As he exhaled, he released resistance. Over time, this breathing became second nature. He no longer breathed to survive, he breathed to awaken. And then came the dreams. Not the ordinary scatterings of the subconscious, but structured journeys. He found himself walking in corridors made of starlight. There were beings there, not alien, not ghostly, but familiar, like forgotten siblings. They never spoke in words, but he understood them. Their message was always the same: keep going, you're almost home. Each morning after, he awoke with a clarity that defied explanation. Ideas flowed through him like water through a clear pipe, effortless and pure. He began to write, not his thoughts, but transmissions. Sentences arrived fully formed. Symbols spilled onto pages without his knowing their meaning. But when he read them back, he felt them resonate in his spine. And in those quiet mornings, as the sun broke over the horizon and the world slowly stirred, William realized something profound. He was no longer remembering alone. There were others. Quietly, all over the world, people were tuning in, some through music, others through silence, some through dance, through prayer, through science, each of them finding their own resonance, their own language of light. This wasn't personal, it was planetary. Part 5, The Silent Architects. It began with whispers, not of words, but of knowing. William would walk into a room and feel it. Someone else had tuned in. They wouldn't say anything. Sometimes they didn't even meet his eyes. But something in the field had shifted. It was like recognizing a melody that no one is playing out loud, yet both can hear. Resonance, he realized, was the new language. It didn't require permission. It only required presence. In cafes, on trains, in markets, he noticed others. Their eyes held depth. Their movements carried a kind of internal rhythm. And when their frequencies aligned, time slowed. Silence became sacred. They didn't need introductions. They were part of the same awakening. The manuscript had hinted at this, calling them the silent architects, souls seated across the world, destined to awaken not by force, but by frequency. It made sense now. The world didn't need saving. It needed remembering. He no longer tried to teach. He began to listen. When others were ready, they asked. And when they asked, he didn't give them answers. He gave them vibration, a tone, a pattern, a practice, just enough for their own memory to unfold. This was not about conversion, it was about resonance. And still, his own evolution continued. During one session, a strange pulse overtook him. The 528 Hz tone vibrated in his headphones, but suddenly, another frequency joined in, one not from the outside but from within. His body trembled, not from fear but from release. His breath sank to something vast, something ancient. He saw the earth not as an orb of rock, but as a living library, its rivers as veins, its mountains as bones, its forests as neural networks. And humanity? Humanity was not the virus. Humanity was the activation code. He wept again, but this time with joy. All his life he had felt out of place, too sensitive, too deep, too silent. But now he understood. He had not been broken. He had been tuning, waiting for the moment when the chord would be struck and the melody would begin. From that day, his sessions became less about structure, more about surrender. He no longer played the frequencies. He became them. He would sit in stillness, and the tone would rise within him unprovoked. No speakers, no headphones, just resonance. His body remembered how to sing the code. Sometimes his hands moved without thought, forming mudras, ancient postures his conscious mind didn't recognize. Sometimes his tongue spoke syllables he never learned. They weren't gibberish. They were glyphs made of sound, phrases that carried frequencies beyond meaning. He would whisper them to the soil in his garden, and the plants began growing faster. His cat would curl beside him during sessions, purring louder than ever before. Even machines behaved differently. His laptop would turn on by itself as he entered the room. Lights would flicker in response to his breath. Reality was not just responding, it was participating. One night, as he stood beneath the stars, a final revelation arrived. It wasn't a vision or a dream. It was a knowing so complete it needed no proof. You are not here to escape the world. You are here to awaken it. That's when he understood the deeper purpose of DNA activation. It wasn't about superpowers. It wasn't about escaping the system or ascending to some heavenly realm. It was about embodying light, fully, here, now. It was about walking the earth with eyes open and heart clear, vibrating in such a way that everything around you begins to remember its own divine design. He wasn't a guru. He wasn't a savior. He was a frequency holder, a lighthouse, a tuning fork. And there were many more like him, silently scattered across the planet, pulsing in rhythm, syncing with the grid of memory beneath all matter. The silent architects had always been here, waiting not for a sign but for a sound. Part 6, The Architects Remember. The morning began like any other, still, quiet, unremarkable. But William had long since learned, it is often within the ordinary that the extraordinary reveals itself. He had risen early, before the sun, drawn by something unsaid. There was no plan, no guided meditation, just silence. And so he sat. For minutes, maybe hours, he simply breathed. No music, no mantras, only the rhythm of his breath and the soft pulse of his heart. And then, it happened. It began as a tingling, not on the skin but beneath it, a tremor in his spine, a pressure behind his eyes, and then light. Not light seen with the eyes, but light known, felt, realer than reality. It unfolded from within him, not descending from above, but erupting from his very core. The frequency of 528 hertz, long used in his sessions, now rose unbidden from within his cells, like a memory waking up. The tone expanded, filled the room, though no device played. His entire body had become the instrument. Then the space shifted. The walls no longer held their solidity. The air grew thick, alive, intelligent. He wasn't alone. Around him stood figures, not separate beings, but aspects, reflections, versions of himself scattered across timelines and dimensions. They bore no faces, but they radiated familiarity. Their presence said one thing: we have been waiting. They called themselves the Echoed, not spirits, not angels, but echoes of potential, the pieces of him that had never died, only waited for frequency to find form. They did not speak in language, but in resonance. Their thoughts moved through him like waves, clear, coherent, and deep. You are not remembering because you are special, the resonance said, but because you are ready. And then came the map. It wasn't geographical, but energetic, a glowing network spanning the earth. Points of light, some dim, some radiant, connected by lines of pulse and intention. The grid was alive, and William understood. This was the crystalline consciousness grid spoken of in ancient traditions. Not a metaphor, but a real planetary lattice designed to awaken when enough nodes, enough humans, aligned their internal codes. He saw cities pulsing with light, forests humming with hidden songs, oceans singing secrets in silence. The earth was not waiting for rescue, it was waiting for resonance. You are one of many, the Echoed said. Your activation is not the end, it is the invitation. And with that, he was shown the next layer, the transmission he had been receiving. Now it was time to give. The manuscript had prepared him for this, but now it was clear. His body had become a transmitter. Through his voice, his presence, even his silence, frequency would travel. Not as persuasion, not as ideology, but as remembrance. Those who were ready would feel it, and something ancient inside them would stir. From that day on, William began to speak less and resonate more. He spent hours in silence, walking barefoot in the forest, letting the earth teach his cells its pulse. He ate lightly, drank deeply, moved slowly. But everywhere he went, change followed. Plants grew brighter, people around him healed faster. Not because of his will, but because of his frequency. He was becoming a lighthouse not by shining, but by vibrating. At night, dreams returned. This time not as symbols, but as councils. Circles of ancient beings, some humanoid, others made of light and geometry. They welcomed him not as a guest, but as a peer. They showed him memories of other planets, other incarnations, other missions. He had done this before, many times, in many forms. Always awakening, always remembering. One being, made entirely of translucent sound, told him, "Every planet has its song, and every song has a moment when it must be sung again. This is Earth's moment. You are the instrument." And William wept, not from pain or joy, but from release. A burden he never knew he carried, of forgetting, finally dissolved. He wasn't becoming someone else. He was finally becoming fully himself. Part 7. The transmission begins. The shift was subtle, like a wind changing direction high above the clouds, unseen but undeniable. William no longer needed confirmation. He knew when his presence altered a room, not through attention, but through attunement. It was in the way people paused mid-sentence, suddenly uncertain why they had spoken at all. It was in how animals approached and lingered, sensing something they couldn't name. It was in the way technology either cooperated or glitched wildly in his proximity, depending on the purity of his alignment. This was the beginning of the transmission. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was not even visible, but it was felt, deeply, like a forgotten song that played in the background of everyone's life, until one note, just one, resonated and they stopped. Not because they understood, but because they remembered. William had become a note. He didn't seek to teach. There were no lessons, no lectures, no stages. Instead, he allowed life itself to orchestrate the unfoldings. A glance, a phrase spoken without intention, a silence that carried more light than any sermon. These were now his offerings, and they were received. People began telling him strange things. "I don't know why, but I feel lighter when I'm around you. You look like someone I saw in a dream." After we spoke, I had this overwhelming need to paint or sing or forgive someone. William didn't take credit. He simply smiled, because he knew it wasn't him. It was the frequency moving through him. The manuscript had warned of this moment, the transition from seeker to sender. It spoke of the energy code becoming self-replicating once stabilized. In other words, once the DNA awakened and the frequency integrated, it would begin to broadcast automatically. The body became a tower, the mind became a lens, the heart a beacon, and the earth began to answer. Wherever he walked, William began to feel responses, buried frequencies waking up in the soil, the wind, the water. Places that had once felt dull or lifeless now buzzed with subtle intelligence. He could feel the grid. Not as concept, but as pulse. Not as theory, but as living intelligence. It was during a walk through an ancient grove of trees that the earth spoke clearly. The ground beneath his feet pulsed with rhythm, slow, deliberate, ancient. As he placed his hand on a weathered trunk, a voice, not external, not internal, but omnipresent, echoed within him. "You are not alone in singing the code. We have waited long to hear this tone again. Welcome back, human." He froze. Tears rose, uninvited, unexplainable. It wasn't just memory, it was reunion. The trees, the rocks, the rivers, they were part of it all. Not background, not scenery, but co-singers in the cosmic chorus. The frequency he carried had awakened their own. They were not passive, they were partners. And now the transmission was multi-directional. He understood the full meaning of what Thoth had written so long ago. As above, so below. As within, so without. As is your frequency, so becomes the world. He began to speak to the earth. Not in human words, but in tones, in hums, in breath. He sang to rivers, whispered to clouds, hummed into the cracks of broken concrete. It wasn't childish, it was sacred. And the world responded, not with noise, but with alignment. Synchronicities increased, doors opened effortlessly. Paths lit up with intuition so strong it felt like memory. People he hadn't seen in years reappeared, saying they felt called. Ideas arrived complete, requiring no refinement. Even sleep changed. Dreams became downloads, narratives of future timelines, planetary grids, and harmonic technologies. One night, during a dream so lucid it felt more real than waking, he stood before a massive crystalline structure, an obelisk made not of stone but of vibrating light. Around it stood others like him, not many, not few, enough. Their bodies shimmered with resonance, their eyes were calm, their presence undeniable, and together they sang. No words, no melodies, just pure tone, each person a different note. And the obelisk responded, pulsing with radiant waves of geometries too complex to describe. The tone moved into the sky, into the earth, into the stars. The transmission was complete. He awoke with tears, not of sadness, not of joy, but of completion. Something had begun, not just in him, but through him. The DNA had not only remembered, it had realigned. The code was now active, and the song of the world had changed forever. Part 8. The final alignment. There is a moment in every journey where the destination vanishes, and all that remains is presence. For William, that moment had arrived, not with fanfare, not with finality, but with a stillness so complete that it echoed louder than any revelation. He no longer sought the tone. He no longer chased alignment. He had become it. The frequency was no longer a practice, but a state of being. Wherever he walked, the ground responded. Whomever he touched, something stirred. Not because he acted, but because he resonated. The manuscript, once his guide, now rested silently on the altar beside his window. Its pages were no longer needed. He had internalized the code. Every breath he took carried the geometry of manifestation. Every step aligned with the earth's memory. Every heartbeat pulsed with the silent chant of the divine. He spent more time in nature than with people, not out of withdrawal, but out of communion. The trees spoke clearly now. The wind carried intention. The birds flew in patterns that mirrored the ancient glyphs once found in forgotten scrolls. And the stars, oh the stars, were no longer distant. They were familiar. They watched. They remembered. One evening, as twilight bled into night, William stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley bathed in silver mist. He had come here without reason. He had simply followed the pull. Above him, the sky opened, not physically but energetically. A vast wave of golden light descended, not with speed, but with purpose. It did not blind. It did not burn. It embraced. And then came the knowing. Not a voice, not a vision, but the purest truth he had ever felt. You are the code, you are the carrier, and you are the key. He saw himself, not as a man, not as a mystic, but as a strand of memory woven into the great lattice of time. Every moment of pain, every breath of awe, every step on every path had led to this point. Not for ascension, but for integration. This was not the end of the story. It was the end of forgetting. He understood now, DNA was never just biology. It was the interface between matter and spirit, between time and eternity. Every cell in his body was a portal. Every thought a waveform. Every emotion a frequency. And when aligned, they became instruments of cosmic harmony. He looked out over the valley, feeling the pulse of life in all things. The earth no longer felt separate. It was an extension of his breath. The stars above no longer distant. They were reflections of what burned within him. He closed his eyes and breathed, not to calm, not to center, but to radiate. With that breath, a wave moved outward, silent, invisible, perfect, across lands, through cities, into hearts still waiting to remember. And they would. Not because he told them to, but because they, too, carried the code. The world had not changed. It had been remembered. As the stars wheeled above him and the earth hummed below, William smiled. Not because he had become something more, but because he had finally become what he had always been. Complete.